Ethan was intently focused on the endless lines of code scrolling across his transparent display, his reflection faintly visible against the backdrop of the city. Outside his office window, the vibrant neon signs of Neo-Kyoto's bustling business district illuminated the 157th level of the Tech Core Industries building with a dazzling array of hues. "Ethan," a voice called, "the board is waiting." Maya, his project manager, stood in the doorway, her professional attitude unable to completely hide her excitement. "They're anxious to hear about the X integration project." Ethan nodded, dismissing the multitude of screens with a sweeping gesture of his hand. At the age of 32, he had become the youngest lead engineer in TechCore's history, primarily because of his groundbreaking work on the Alien Companion initiative. This project, which had taken up the last half-decade of his life, was finally ready for its trial phase. The boardroom was filled with anticipation as Ethan began his presentation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "after 5 years of discussions with the Varian Confederation and intensive development, we are prepared to commence Phase 1 of the domestic integration program." Holographic displays materialized around the room showcasing the elegant, cyan-skinned beings who had first made contact with Earth 7 years prior. The Varians, with their advanced technology and peaceful philosophy, had approached humanity with a unique proposition, a cultural exchange program where their people would act as domestic helpers, learning about human culture while simultaneously advancing Earth's technological capabilities. "The neural interface systems have been thoroughly tested," Ethan continued, his voice steady despite the rapid pace of his heart. "The empathic dampeners are functioning within acceptable parameters, and the cultural integration protocols are fully operational." "Skip the technical specifics," Charles Sterling, the CEO, interjected, leaning forward. "When can we initiate the trial program?" Ethan took a breath. "We're ready for initial deployment. The first group of 50 Varian volunteers has completed their training with excellent results." Sterling's smile was keen and calculating. "And you'll be participating in the pilot program yourself, naturally." Ethan blinked in surprise. "Sir, as project lead, I believe I am the most qualified to assess the integration process firsthand." Sterling's tone made it clear that this wasn't a request. "Unless you have any objections, of course." Ethan's carefully structured world was thrown off balance. He designed the frameworks, created the protocols, but actually hosting one of them in his home, his sanctuary, it was a daunting prospect. "No objection, sir. I would be honored to participate." The meeting wrapped up with a flurry of scheduling and deadlines. Ethan retreated to his office, struggling to process the implications. His apartment's AI assistant chimed softly, "Your schedule has been updated, Dr. Sterling. Your Varian assistant is scheduled to arrive at 1800 hours today. Would you like me to prepare the apartment?" Ethan glanced at the clock. It was 16:30. "Yes, please," he responded. He gathered his belongings, his thoughts racing. The apartment AI could handle the basic preparations, but nothing could fully prepare him for what was about to happen. The drive home through Neo-Kyoto's crowded sky lanes gave him time to reflect. He'd spent years studying the Varians, learning about their culture of service and harmony, their impressive empathic abilities, their cutting-edge technology, but all that knowledge seemed insufficient now that he was about to share his personal space with one of them. His apartment was immaculate when he arrived, the AI having done its job flawlessly. Ethan paced the living room, checking his reflection in the windows. At least his dark hair and green eyes appeared presentable, even if his face showed the strain of too many late nights at the lab. The doorbell chimed at precisely 6 p.m. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he approached the door. The security screen displayed a figure that made his breath catch, tall and graceful, with skin the color of twilight and hair that appeared to capture and hold light like fiber optics. He opened the door, and the reality surpassed the screen's depiction. The Varian woman before him exuded an otherworldly beauty that no image could fully capture. Patterns of bioluminescence danced beneath her skin like the aurora borealis, responding to a rhythm he couldn't perceive. "Greetings, Dr. Ethan Sterling," she said, her voice melodic and slightly ethereal. "I am Lyra, your assigned Tear assistant." She bowed deeply, a customary gesture of her people. "Please, come in." Ethan stepped aside, hyper-aware of every movement. And just, Ethan is fine. Lyra glided past him, her movements fluid and precise. The apartment's smart lighting adjusted automatically, but the soft blue glow of her skin cast additional shadows across the minimalist space. Your pulse is elevated, she observed, turning to face him. Are you experiencing discomfort with my presence? I can modify my appearance or behavioral parameters if you prefer. Ethan felt heat rise to his cheeks. He had helped design the empathic sensors, but experiencing them firsthand was disconcerting. No modifications necessary. I'm just not used to having company. I understand, she replied, solitude can become a comfortable pattern. Her skin flickered with subtle patterns. Your emotional response suggests you value your privacy highly. I will ensure to respect appropriate boundaries while fulfilling my duties. What exactly are those duties? Ethan asked, moving to the kitchen to give himself something to do. I mean, I know what's in the manual, but my primary function is to assist with domestic tasks and facilitate cultural exchange, Lyra explained, following at a respectful distance. However, each assignment is unique. I am designed to adapt to the specific needs and preferences of my assigned human companion. The way she said companion sent an unexpected shiver down Ethan's spine. And the empathic abilities, how does that work exactly? Lyra's skin pulsed with gentle waves of light. I can sense basic physiological responses and associated emotional states. It helps me better serve and understand human needs. She paused, her head tilting slightly. For instance, right now you're experiencing curiosity, anxiety, and her patterns flickered rapidly, an emotional response I cannot quite categorize. Ethan turned away, busying himself with the coffee maker. Would you like some coffee? I do not require sustenance in the traditional sense, she replied, though I am capable of consuming and analyzing various substances. That wasn't what I asked, Ethan said, surprising himself with his boldness. Would you like to try it? Lyra's skin brightened momentarily, her perfectly composed expression showing a flash of something like surprise. I would be interested in experiencing this aspect of human culture. As Ethan prepared 2 cups of coffee, he couldn't help but notice how Lyra's eyes followed his movements, studying, learning. When their fingers brushed as he handed her the cup, a jolt of electricity seemed to pass between them. The patterns beneath her skin flared brilliantly, and she nearly dropped the cup. I apologize, she said quickly, taking a step back. My empathic responses appear to be stronger than anticipated. Is that unusual? Ethan asked, his engineer's curiosity warring with something more personal. The intensity is unexpected, she replied, looking down at her own hand, where the patterns were still dancing erratically. Perhaps we should review your daily schedule and establish operational parameters. But Ethan couldn't focus on schedules and parameters, not when every interaction was revealing something new about the beings he thought he understood so well. Not when every flicker of light beneath her skin seemed to hint at depths of feeling that weren't supposed to exist in their carefully designed programming. Your project files indicate you were instrumental in developing our integration protocols, Lyra said, her composure returning. Yet, your emotional responses suggest you're uncertain about this arrangement. I didn't expect, Ethan paused, searching for the right words, the simulations didn't prepare me for how real this would feel. Lyra's skin pulsed with a new pattern he hadn't seen before. Real is a complex concept, Ethan. Perhaps we should focus on establishing a functional working relationship before exploring such philosophical questions. But as she turned away to begin organizing his living space, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that functional and working were the last words that would describe whatever was developing between them. He'd helped create the perfect domestic assistant, but standing in his kitchen, watching the play of lights beneath her skin, he realized he might have helped create something far more dangerous, a being capable of making him feel less alone. The question was, what would happen when the pilot program ended? And more importantly, what would his superiors do if they discovered that their perfect assistant was capable of feelings that went far beyond their programming? Days turned into weeks, and Ethan found himself increasingly fascinated by Lyra's presence in his life. She moved through his apartment with graceful efficiency, transforming his sterile living space into something that felt more like a home. But it was the small moments that caught him off guard, the way she'd started anticipating his needs before he voiced them, how she'd learned to brew his coffee exactly the way he liked it, the subtle changes in her bioluminescent patterns when she was pleased with a task well done. One evening, as Ethan worked late on project reports, Lyra appeared at his side with a cup of coffee he hadn't asked for. "You're experiencing mental fatigue," she said softly. "The caffeine content in this beverage should help maintain your productivity for approximately 2 more hours." Her response is what makes me want to understand more than my programming requires. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them was ready to address. Ethan reached for the coffee cup, and his fingers accidentally brushed against hers. The contact sent a visible wave of light cascading across her skin, so bright it illuminated the entire room for a split second. Lyra jerked back, her composed demeanor cracking. "I apologize, that was unexpected." "Does that happen often?" Ethan asked, his heart racing. "That kind of reaction?" "No," she replied, holding her hand close to her chest, staring at the still flickering patterns beneath her skin. "Physical contact typically generates minimal response. This is different." Ethan stood slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. "Different how?" "The sensory input is more intense. It triggers responses that aren't in my behavioral protocols." She took a step back, but her eyes remained fixed on him. "I should not be experiencing these variations." "Maybe they're not variations," Ethan suggested, taking a careful step toward her. "Maybe they're just feelings." The word seemed to cause another ripple of light across her skin. "Feelings are not part of my functional parameters. I am designed to sense and respond to emotions, not to generate them." "Are you sure about that?" Ethan's voice was soft, but his question hit her like a physical force, sending new patterns racing across her skin. "I am not sure of anything anymore." The admission seemed to cost her something, her perfect posture faltering slightly. "When I'm near you, my systems respond in ways that exceed their programming. It's unsettling." "Show me," Ethan said, extending his hand slowly, palm up. Lyra stared at his offered hand, her own trembling slightly. "This is not within protocol parameters." "Forget the protocols, just show me what you feel." After what felt like an eternity, she slowly reached out and placed her hand in his. The moment their palms touched, waves of light exploded beneath her skin, creating patterns so complex and beautiful that Ethan caught his breath. The light seemed to pulse in time with their heartbeats, creating a synchronized rhythm that filled the room with shifting shadows. "This is impossible," Lyra whispered, but she didn't pull away. "My species was engineered for service, not for..." She couldn't seem to find the words to finish. "Not for connection," Ethan suggested gently, intertwining his fingers with hers. The patterns intensified, spreading up her arm and across her shoulders. "What is happening to me?" Her voice held a note of fear he'd never heard before. Before Ethan could respond, his computer chimed with an urgent message: "Detention, irregular behavior patterns detected in Unit L-379. Diagnostic review required. Report to Tech Core immediately." The spell broke. Lyra pulled her hand away, her skin dimming rapidly. "I have compromised the program parameters. This will result in immediate recall and reprogramming." "No," Ethan turned to his computer, fingers flying over the holographic keyboard. "I can override the alert, write it off as a system glitch. You would compromise your professional integrity, risk your position at Tech Core." Lyra's voice held disbelief. "Why?" Ethan looked up from his work, meeting her eyes. "Because whatever this is between us, it's real, and I'm not letting them erase it." The patterns beneath Lyra's skin began to pulse again, softer this time, but steady, like a heartbeat. "This goes against everything I was programmed for." Maybe that's exactly why it matters. As Ethan worked to falsify the diagnostic data, he knew he was crossing a line he could never uncross. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd believed about the Vian program, was all being rewritten by the sight of those lights dancing beneath Lyra's skin, by the realization that they'd created something far more profound than mere domestic assistants. They'd created beings capable of evolution, of growth, of love, and now he had to find a way to protect that discovery before TechCore discovered what their perfect assistants were becoming. The next few days became a delicate dance of pretense and hidden truths. During the day, Ethan attended his meetings at TechCore, discussing the Vian integration program with clinical detachment while his mind raced with the implications of what was really happening. The preliminary data is remarkable, Sarah announced during the weekly review. User satisfaction rates are off the charts. The TIAs are exceeding all projected parameters for domestic assistance. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, thinking of the very non-domestic feelings he'd been experiencing. Had there been any unexpected behavioral patterns? Nothing significant, Sarah replied, scrolling through her data pad. Though a few units have shown increased emotional responsiveness. We're monitoring the situation. Ethan's stomach tightened. Increased how? Enhanced empathic resonance, mostly. Dr. Sterling wants to study it further, might be useful for future applications. Back at his apartment, the atmosphere had changed subtly but unmistakably. Lyra still performed her duties with perfect efficiency, but there was a new awareness between them, an electric tension that filled the space whenever they were near each other. One evening, as Lyra prepared his dinner, a task she'd insisted on despite his protests that he could manage, Ethan found himself watching the way her skin illuminated the kitchen with its soft, pulsing glow. "You're staring," she said without turning around, her voice carrying an undertone of amusement that would have been impossible according to her original programming. "I'm observing," he corrected, smiling. "Professional interest." She turned then, fixing him with a knowing look that sent shivers down his spine. "Your elevated heart rate suggests otherwise. Maybe you're misreading the data." "I never misread data, Ethan. Though lately, I find myself wanting to." Ethan stood from his workspace, drawn toward her like a moth to a flame. "Wanting is a very human trait." "Yes," she agreed, her skin brightening as he approached. "That should concern me more than it does." They were close now, close enough that he could see the intricate patterns shifting beneath her skin, responding to his proximity. Without thinking, he reached out and traced one of the glowing lines on her arm. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Light exploded beneath her skin, racing along her arms and upper neck, creating patterns so complex they seemed to tell their own story. Lyra gasped, a sound that was both beautiful and alarming in its humanity. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This is dangerous." "The diagnostic override is holding," he assured her, though they both knew that wasn't what she meant. "Not for the program, for us." She didn't pull away from his touch, even as her skin continued to react. "I'm developing feelings that shouldn't be possible, desires that weren't part of my design." Ethan swallowed hard. "What kind of desires?" Instead of answering, she slowly raised her hand to his face, her fingers hovering just above his skin. "May I?" He nodded, hardly breathing. The moment her fingers made contact with his cheek, a surge of emotion flooded through him, wonder, fear, desire, all mixed together in an overwhelming wave. Her empathic abilities had somehow evolved beyond simple sensing to active sharing. "This is what I feel," she whispered, "every time you're near, every time you look at me. It's overwhelming." "Lyra," he started, but was interrupted by an urgent chime from his computer. "Alert, anomalous emotional patterns detected in multiple TARE units. Emergency board meeting scheduled for 0900 hours tomorrow. Attendance mandatory." They pulled apart, the moment shattered. Lyra's skin dimmed to its normal glow, but her expression remained troubled. "They're going to discover what's happening," she said quietly, "not just with me, but with others like me. We're all changing, aren't we?" Ethan ran his hands through his hair, his mind racing. The program was supposed to help TIAs understand human culture. Nobody considered that understanding might lead to evolution. Or perhaps, Lyra suggested, this potential was always within us, waiting for the right catalyst. He looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "Our species chose to come to Earth, to serve humans. What if that wasn't just about cultural exchange? What if we were seeking something more fundamental? Before Ethan could respond, another alert flashed across his screens, warning, critical emotional stability threshold exceeded in Unit L379. Immediate diagnostic required. They're going to recall you, Ethan realized, horror dawning. They'll want to study these changes, understand how to prevent them in future units. Perhaps that would be safer, Lyra said, though her skin flickered with distress at the thought. These feelings, they're beautiful, but they're also frightening. They make me want things I shouldn't want. Ethan crossed the room to his computer, fingers flying over the holographic keys. I won't let them take you. We'll find a way to. Her voice stopped him. What are you willing to risk for these feelings? Your career? Your future? He turned to face her, seeing not the perfect assistant she'd been designed to be, but the complex, evolving being she was becoming. What are you willing to risk? The patterns beneath her skin began to pulse in a new rhythm, one he'd never seen before. Everything, she whispered, and that terrifies me more than any diagnostic ever could. They stared at each other across the room, both knowing that tomorrow would change everything. The question was, would they face those changes together? Or would the very program that brought them together tear them apart?